All right, I'll call the meeting to order. Thank you all for joining us this evening and for this meeting with the Board of Finance and the Board of Ed to discuss the budget that was presented to us almost a month ago. We will have an opportunity to discuss back and forth, and then later on an opportunity for public participation if anybody so desires. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to say, Gil, before we get started, or?
Yes, just you may notice the dark bags under the eyes of most of the principals and staff. They have been working awfully hard over the last week to complete the questions, but particularly I want you to note that the answers to the questions, and I hope you appreciate the amount of effort that's gone into the answers, but more importantly, the effort that's gone into the work that has given the opportunity for them to answer the questions. There is a great deal of thought that's been put in. I think you've found good questions. You've certainly asked a lot of them, and I think you've gone very deep, but I think you'll also see that the effort that's gone into to the actual work has been well thought out, and I think that just is a tribute to the superintendent and his administration, the amount of effort that they've put. So thank you.
Yeah, we certainly got some very detailed information in the responses, and clearly a lot of work went into providing that detail. I'm going to start off this evening with the issue of the two-year budget presentation projections that we asked for way back in October, and then again at the meeting back in February. The answer that we got from the Wilton Public School Administrative Leadership Team was that given a lot of information on different assumptions, we respectfully submit that any projections beyond the proposed 2011-2012 budget would be grossly inaccurate, most likely overstated, and be of no real value. We, as a board, I think it's safe to say, disagree with that conclusion. We also disagree that providing this information would not be possible, that it's not possible to make estimates in the areas that you've outlined here. In fact, most corporations, even those that have bargaining units in it, do 5-year plans for their boards. The state of Connecticut does a 2-year plan, and they certainly have similar type of collective bargaining agreements to what you're talking about. It is certainly possible to make assumptions in the area of transportation, supplies, building activities, all the things that you have cited here. So we respectfully disagree that it's not possible to do this or that it would not be beneficial. We see the benefit of that in being able to project beyond this fiscal year into fiscal year 13 and 14 as to where are we going as a town and with respect to the overall tax increases. We've spent many years just looking at the next year, and then the next year comes and it's another data point we start talking about for that year, and we think there's much more value to having a longer-term view of where we're going. It is in the purview of the Board of Finance to make reasonable requests. It is also in the purview of the Board of Ed to turn down those reasonable requests. I would respectfully ask, given that this is addressed to the members of the Board of Finance and the members of the Board of Education by the WPS Administrative Leadership Team, whether the Board of Education in fact agrees with this, that it is not possible to make a reasonable projection for fiscal years 13 and 14.
Well, the Board of Ed has never voted on that. We have given the questions as a question that, together with the other questions to the administration to be answered, and I gave you their response. Is this something that we should be voting on? I don't think so. We don't vote on all the other questions that were given. We don't have the background to be able to vote on those questions or to know the accuracy of it. We rely on the administration to let us know. So we would respect the opinions of the administration and not offering the two-year projection.
As a board, this does not require you to make any assessment of any detailed information like questions. This is a management issue. Is it possible to do a 2- and 3rd-year projection? The state of Connecticut does it. I'm a little bit at a loss as to why the Wilton, Connecticut public school system can't do it.
The state of Connecticut may not have been the best example to choose.
Corporations do it too, but
No, the moment they sort of agree on a number, they're probably half a billion dollars off from that moment going forward.
it's still guiding information, Dick, which is what we're looking for.
I understand,
here.
but I think speaking for one, and I know some of the board, I think to provide the information that's going to in the end be more misleading than helpful.
To who? Not to us. It'll be very helpful to us. And we're looking for all the help we can get to make educated decisions about what to do with the Board of Education
budgets. We know that
budgets.
information that we give you is, and again, I'm speaking as a single person, if we know the information that we're giving you is going to be misleading as opposed to enlightening, you may find...
Give me an example, because I can take any one that you think is misleading and turn it around and say it's very telling. Take salaries, for example. If you hold them flat, I can then say if salaries are flat, we're going to get a 3% increase year over year, which means we know that anything more than that is problematic. So there's value in that.
Speaking as one, I have to say I agree with the Board of Finance's perspective that it would make sense for us, to the extent that we could, try to project out what our costs are. And I think we probably do at some level. And we could probably have, that's very nice of you, thank you. And I don't believe that, by the way. I think that was rather cruel. I believe that we could put down our assumptions and outline those assumptions. And if the assumptions change, then they change. But at least people would understand that.
Well, and to me, Lynn put together the 3-year mill rate projection back in October. She did that by going out and talking to a lot of people and made estimates for all the various factors. I think you're familiar with that. The only thing that I'm 100% certain about the work that she did is that not a single one of those will come out to be accurate. They're all going to be off. To me, that's a given. An estimate on anything that, whether we do, you do, we know that's not going to be accurate. But my hope was that by doing that, it would provide at least a picture of what a year out, 2 years out, what it might look like. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Or probably poor choice of words. I was fully prepared, back with the work that Lynn did in October, and it looked like, from what she did, a year from now, the picture's going to get a little brighter. 2 years from now, it's going to get a little brighter again. So and I'm just speaking for myself, I was fully prepared to, in some way, shape, or form, kind of smooth that out over 3 years, take some money, metaphorically speaking, from the pocket next year and 2 years from now and maybe move it forward to this year. But without reasonable estimates, that forces me, and again, just speaking for myself, to not consider that. I'll be in a position where I'll just have to look at this year in isolation.
And I would echo Warren and Jim on that. If you look at it 1 year at a time, then you're operating in a vacuum. And as a result of that, you look at the economic crisis today versus the needs today and come up with a mill rate predicated on that, as opposed to looking over the course of 3 years, where if this year we were to, and this is just, I'm not saying this is a number I'm agreeing with, it's a number I'm just putting out there for argument's sake, to agree for a 5 or 6% mill rate, knowing that in 2 years it would be a 2% mill rate, thereby over the course of the 3 years we're looking at a 3.5% year-over-year mill rate. That's much more tenable than it would be if this year is 5, next year we don't know, next year after that we don't know. And to the degree that we do projections on class size and that you're extrapolating from that information, which is a projection, what your teacher needs are going to be, what your class loads are going to look like, I would argue you're already doing that. And you just need to add some other elements to those projections and put forth years 2 and 3 projections for us, because it helps, at least again for myself, it helps me to better reconcile what this year's mill rate would be in context for what the out years might look like.
You know, I'll just follow up on Jim, because I think what he said, I think I have said numerous times in public, that exactly that I planned on taking some money from 2013 and 2014 in order to be able to come up with a number for 2012, because there were so many factors outside of, you know, every bad thing came into 2012, and to the extent that we can get relief in 2013 and 2014. I've been saying that for a while, and we have been hearing from taxpayers to say the same thing. I look out there at Stacy, who has sat through every one of our meetings, so at the end of our, you know, hour-and-a-half meeting, she can come up and remind us about that. Please don't take big cuts to 2012, because there are opportunities in 2013 and 2014. And she's the co-chair of the budget committee for the PTA. And I just feel like to just not do it, and I don't understand the rationale for not doing it. Did it for years in my professional career, just did it in October for the town. So I don't accept the fact that you can't do it, and I think it's to the benefit of the Board of Ed budget, and so I don't even know why you would not do it.
And it's not even
Makes no
it's
sense.
not even a corporate thing. I mean, every nonprofit in the world forecasts.
I
out.
do it for the
2
play
years,
shop.
3
I
years,
just did it
5
again
years.
today.
They
Yeah.
all do it.
Mr. Chairman, if I could comment for a second. You know, I know we're all supposed to be speaking as a board, but since other members have taken the liberty to speak individually, I shall as well. And quite frankly, the variables in our budget are so minuscule year over year, and so predictable year over year based on class size, that it would probably be pretty easy to project 5 and 10 years out. I totally agree with Jim. The further you go out, the less accurate it is. But there aren't that many variables. The only variable that we're dealing with now is a declining enrollment. So if anything, we're going to over budget and not under budget.
Okay. We've expressed our viewpoint. There is still time for you to provide those 2 years. I think you've heard that it's to the benefit of the Board of Ed and administration to provide them. You have a meeting coming up Thursday, I think. You can decide what you want to do. We'll move on to the questions. So, who wants to go with their questions?
We going in order or hopping
Uh,
around?
We can, or we can go by person. Would you like to start, Andy?
Hopefully.
You can say no.
I gotta find one.
I have one question, I guess probably for Ken. There was a very instructive, here it is. There was a breakdown of total salaries by, I believe, every position certified and classified, is that right? So my question is this, when you add all of these numbers up, you get a number $39,333,852. That's about $5 million lower than the salaries certified and classified line item in this. The discrepancy about $5 million. And I'm wondering what that is.
I would have to go back and look at it to tell you for sure, Andy, but I know that these are just current salaries. These are current salaries. And didn't include
No, it's just base pay.
base pay.
Doesn't include anything additional such as stipends.
And it's the actuals based on people on staff right now. It's not the budgeted salary for next year.
With the increases.
Right.
So when you go to the summary total page and you see salaries, classroom teacher salaries, other certified salaries, teacher aide, clerical, maintenance, I'm asking the same question twice, I'm sorry, I just didn't quite understand. It's lines 11, 10, 11, 11, 11, 16, sorry, no, just 11, 10, 11, 11, 11, sorry, 12, 10, 12, 11, 12, 12. So it's just the 5 lines: salaries, classroom teacher salaries, other cert, salaries, teacher's aide, salary clerical, salary maintenance custodians. Those added together are $5 million higher than this total. I didn't include additional time, I didn't include IL stipends. I'm just wondering what that difference is.
I'd have to go back and look at that and just, off the top of my head.
I have others, please. Go ahead.
Just, I'll go next if that's okay. On questions 2 and 3 of the first round of questions, where we talk about the opportunity for participation fees for athletics and co-curricular if we were to follow Ridgefield, Darien, and Tallinn models. For question 2, with respect to those, the number for Darien does not include the supplemental that Darien charges. So by way of example, for students who participate in the ski team, there is an additional $435 supplemental that's charged to those students. For students who participate in squash, there's an additional $685 that is charged to the students. So with respect to that, has any work been done as it relates to what Darien's total participation fee revenue would look like?
I don't know what theirs would look like. I don't believe we have squash. And how much was the ski?
So ski team was $435, boys hockey was $750, girls hockey was $500, and squash was $685. In boys hockey, if I'm not mistaken, and don't quote me on this, I don't want to quote the count on that. But there were supplemental dollars that were allocated to that. So with respect to the participation fee, which is for the athletics, I do believe that there was some in the co-curricular, but that $90,000 doesn't account for the co-curricular, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that number's off to begin with from co-curricular, which I also think is true for Ridgefield as well. I don't think Tallinn charges the co-curricular, but I know Ridgefield does. So I think the numbers are off because they're absent the co-curricular. But leaving that aside, do you know what the numbers would look like in Darien if we would include the supplementals?
The hockey has 45 projected participants, so you said $750 for that. That's probably about $30,000 additional. And what was the other one? Ski?
Well, the ski team was $435 and girls hockey was $500.
Girls hockey has fewer participants than that. Girls hockey has 25 participants, that would be 12,500.
And the ski team, would you know?
Ski team is 50 participants. And how much was that?
$435.
So that would be about a little over $20,000.
And then with respect to Ridgefield's co-curricular, do you know the total count in Ridgefield's co-curricular?
I applied their fee structures to our counts, not.
Just as it relates to athletics, though.
I checked with my counterpart in Ridgefield, and last I talked with him, he didn't have a co-curricular fee. So I'll double check on that.
Okay, because I'd spoken to.
So this is just athletics.
And then with respect to number 3, then, just because the 3 is a follow-on topic to that, it appears that the numbers for 3. Let me back into that for a moment. So we look at the total dollars that would have been raised had we followed those models, but they appear to only account for the numbers as it relates to the athletics. Is that correct? What we anticipate the revenue to be? So Ridgefield, Darien, we're anticipating we'd raise 296, and now with the adjustment to Darien, we'd be at roughly 235, maybe a little bit more, and Tolland would be 362, but that's only
Right.
relative to athletics.
Right.
And if we were to include because Darien charges a participation fee in their co-curricular, and I apologize, I've only
Well,
seen
the
this
Darien
about
model I was-
25 hours ago.
I'm sorry, the Darien model I was doing co-curriculars.
So the 90,000 included clubs?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
So if we were to follow that and apply those numbers to our clubs,
Mhm.
you're saying that we would only generate 90,000 in
Right.
total? That would include club participation and athletic participation?
Right, we were assuming a total of about 973 participants, three-quarters.
And with, as it relates to the co-curricular, do we have, I got the student count.
Yeah.
It didn't include the PPX, but leaving that aside for a minute. Do we know the number of unique students that participate in each of the schools?
In the,
As opposed to, I'm not looking for the bleed over for students that participate in 2 or more programs, but students that would participate in just one program. So if they participated in 2, they'd be counted once versus twice?
I don't have that in the co-curriculars, I have that for athletics.
Can we get that for the co-curriculum?
I assume we can, yes.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
I'll do some follow-up questions. Question number 19. I assumed you were done since you said okay.
Yeah, I'll
right?
come back, I'll come back. 'cause I got-
Sorry.
We're going around.
I'm
We're going around. Andy wasn't
Okay.
finished either, so.
I'm not sure what, this is question 19, I'm not sure if it's in the
Round one
first
or
or,
two?
I think it's in round 1. It's the question about if there's been a study done of the world language. The question was actually if you've done a study of the change from beginning in the grade 5 to grade 4, and the answer was that you couldn't study grade 3, the impact of starting in grade 3. So I guess the question is, my understanding, and you can tell me if I'm correct or wrong, is that the introduction at the grade 4 level began with the current year's senior class. So the question is there been any analysis of the impact of that?
No, not yet, because the cohort is currently a senior year.
So is it likely that it would be done in the next year or two?
Not until after their senior year, 2014.
That's what it says right there.
No, wait a minute. The group that started, no, the question
The
was,
first cohort of students who began languages in Wilton in grade 3 is our current freshman class.
I know, but that wasn't the question. The question was, if you've looked at, prior to that going to grade 3, you were at grade 4, which was the current senior class. Am I correct? They started at 4. So the question is, will you analyze the impact on that class of the move from starting at grade 5
Our
to
ILs
4?
will look at that, they'll look at their formative and summative assessments, they'll look at their AP scores if they're in the AP classes, but they haven't done that as yet,
Okay, so that would be
They will-
something that might be available next year.
hopefully.
Okay.
Well, and what's at issue is, I'm looking at the communication from our instructional leader at the high school, and the issue is we need to be clear about when the grade 4 cohort began that work. And it's my understanding that that is our freshman class. So we need to verify if that grade 3 number that you see in your copy is actually the correct answer.
But with the
and
wrong
then-
grade?
And then need to recalculate the grade 4 cohort, but the
The
communication I have
IL
followed up.
and it's the grade 3.
Okay.
That's why I put grade 3 in there, because
Okay.
the IL followed up with the correct grade.
So at the end of the day, we need to go back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Now, Westport had said either last year or the year before that they were going to do a study on that. Are you aware I haven't been able to see the study. Are you aware if they did it?
I don't think they've done it yet.
Okay.
We have our ILs working with the surrounding either department chairs or instructional leaders in world language. So they are working with them. In fact, they have a meeting within the next 2 weeks
Okay.
to discuss some of these things. Not the
Okay.
questions, but some of the issues. Westport and New Canaan also start in the lower grades though.
They start even lower?
Yes,
Yeah.
kindergarten.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, the only, Weston starts, is it just New Canaan, Wilton, Westport, and Weston that are in elementary at all? I know Darien is not.
Darien was looking at it.
Yeah.
I haven't done that analysis for 3 years.
Okay,
I have 3 years back, but I don't have it of this year.
okay. Okay,
Are you going?
sure. Number 17 on the same page, I don't know, do you have any answer to that yet? You said that was to be provided.
Sean's been out ill. Sean has been ill.
Oh, okay,
I
all right,
believe he
fine.
has the,
Okay.
we will follow up with that.
Okay, and then can we just get a little bit more clarification on question 20? I mean, I thought that, I listened to your meetings and thought that this sounded like a great program. And I'm not really I feel like some of the costs are addressed, the difference, you know, the 115,000 versus, I don't know if that's versus the 70, I don't know what the 70,000 is that's being put into the current program. But it seemed like just a marginal difference for what seemed like a really great program and seemed like it would address the future and, you know, address some.
We're still looking at it, but
Okay.
we did not put it in the budget because of the $115,000, number one, the $115,000 startup cost. We also have to train a teacher in modules. It's a 2-week summer residency program, and we just can't force a teacher to do that. So I have to generate some interest
Okay.
in staff. We just went to the initial workshop this year, so we still have some more work to do, and we have been invited to look at another district that just put it in this year.
Okay.
We don't have any of the answers as far as an analysis of the program in Connecticut yet.
Okay, okay.
So rather than jump in and put in something that might not work, we would want to go a little bit more slowly. But it's
Okay.
something we think is pretty attractive.
So what about the 70,000 that's in the budget to go, to be spent in the rehab of family and consumer science? If you went in this direction, I mean, what, is that rehab no longer necessary? Or, I mean, what is that $70,000?
Have you been in the family and consumer science, have you taken continuing education classes?
I have not.
Well, if you go in the family and consumer science classroom, there are sewing machines in the kitchen, but it's very, very old. And we looked at it with Sean 1 year to try to put it back together in pieces, and it's just not, it's not doable. So it's used by the community for continuing ed courses as well.
So you're saying, so even if in the middle school, if you abandon that curriculum, we would still need to spend the 70,000 for continuing ed?
Continuing ed, we're going to use it, or other community facilities, we're going to use it.
Okay. That was it.
While we're on that page, question 18 was how many FTEs are campus supervisors? And the answer was there were 9.1 full-time equivalent campus supervisors, 2.3 FTEs at Middlebrook School, and 6.8 FTEs at Wilton High School. And if we go back to that chart we talked about earlier with the pay information on it, the average, I think there was 24,000 something. And my question would be, do we really need 6.8 FTE campus supervisors at Wilton High School? If you could get by with 4.8, you have $50,000 that buys you a social worker. I mean, I don't get it. I mean, I looked at the job description, which you put in here, and some of this stuff, which is in the job description, I know you put security systems in place to take care of some of this. So I'm just baffled why we need 6.8 FTEs as campus supervisors at the Wilton High School.
Well, I think you can appreciate the responsibility we have to provide a safe and appropriate learning environment for our students. We have 1,300 adolescents in our building. It's a large campus. The supervision that's required is not only within the building, it's also at the perimeter in our parking lots. I think, knock on wood, but we've been able to leverage the staffing that we have to try to do all that we can to address the complex issues around drug and alcohol use, around trying to maintain, again, an environment where our students are interacting with each other in what's described as an acceptable way, in light of some of the recent issues around bullying and harassment. Certainly it's an area that we have looked at for cost savings. The extent to which we have reduced the .8 position as part of last year's reductions, which is the evening supervisory piece. We did take a look at that last year, and then we did restore that position as a result of the cost savings that occurred at the end of the cycle due to some of the wage freezes. So I respect the commentary. It's something we have looked at, but I think you probably would not be surprised that I would be looking to maximize the amount of supervisory staff that I have in the building for the reasons I've stated.
I would agree with you that student safety is an important issue. My question is, we have 42 going to 43 police officers in the town alone for a population of 18,000. It just, 6.8 seems like a big number, so if, you are the manager there, and if you think it takes 6.8 FTEs to do it, I gotta say, okay, Tim, that's what it takes to do it. But that's my question was along those lines. Does it really take that?
Can I just follow up on that? I've been asked on more than one occasion by a parent if the school has ever considered a door swipe. The kids carry a card and you swipe all the doors as an alternative to this. Or maybe as in tandem with this, at least the issue of kids leaving campus when they're not supposed to and whatever, can that be satisfied with the swipe? So I guess if you could just
My
respond to
understanding
that.
is some high schools have gone to that system. It not only provides security in and out of the building, it also is a system that can be used to help with your attendance module and all those efforts. My understanding, I don't know if Ken can help, is it's a costly endeavor. And in this climate, quite frankly, we've prioritized security cameras as our next item to move our security efforts forward. We've recently, I think, have been very proactive in creating the kiosk in the main entrance area of high school. It's the only way in and out, and we do have that ability to monitor not only students coming in and out of the building, but community members and all visitors to the campus. But again, it's a very it's a very complex environment. Certainly, when this school was built back in the day, right here on Route 7, the school has been placed in a situation where it makes it very difficult to monitor the comings and goings of our students.
Okay. I guess at some point, I don't know if you ever looked at those numbers of what a system like that costs? I have no clue. Neither did the people that asked me.
We looked at it probably 4 or 5 years ago when we started first looking at the putting in the security measures that we have, and we've got swipe cards on some of the doors that employees use.
Okay.
The theory being that we would lock all the perimeter doors except for the main entrance to funnel all students and all other visitors in.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have to go to a swipe card with students. But I don't know what the expense of that would be.
Okay.
Actually, that's a good question, because I would then like to see what that would cost, and then the cost benefit, or the break-even point where that is, that would be able to then reduce the number of staff required in security. I'm wondering where the out years would be, because I'm wondering then also if it's worth bonding. Obviously not this year, it's too near term, but if it's worth in the out years bonding and
I'm
then
not sure
offloading the
how
personnel
putting the
costs.
swipe card system for the students would save us any money. The campus supervisors aren't standing at the doors watching people come in and out. Tim could probably explain how they're stationed around the campus. Unless you're gonna, and you can't lock them from the inside, so students can still get out. I don't see how that would be able to allow us to reduce the number of.
So you don't think that there would be any personnel, Tim, that's for you, you don't think there'd be a benefit in terms of personnel savings resultant of monitoring through card swipe?
I don't think that that particular enhancement would actually lead to any kind of efficiencies in our supervisory staff.
Okay.
I would be open-minded about looking at that if the security cameras were,
Warren, turn your phone off.
we're interested in seeing what the introduction of security cameras on campus could do to help and perhaps alleviate the human resource need in that area.
Thanks.
With respect to question 1, where we talk about the schedule of retired and terminated courses with the enrollment numbers at the time of retirement, we didn't get the enrollment numbers, but that's not my question. My question is, in 1997 and 1998, we show we added AP Physics, AP French ML, and AP Spanish ML, which ML stands for multi-level. Did those not exist before that? Or are these additional sections?
It predates me, Mr. Sarin. That's, I hesitate to say I was a student at that time. But based on the chart that I inherited from my predecessors, I would conclude that that's when the courses were offered for the first time.
Are the enrollment numbers available for that?
Well,
For those courses, by the way?
The difficulty in terms of providing you with that data is often these decisions are arrived at after the courses aren't offered because of declining enrollment. So, we monitor that and then make those decisions, student interest being a factor in whether a course continues. Now, in recent years, you're aware of the fact in these last 2 budget cycles of how we have had to make difficult decisions in the world languages because courses were undersubscribed. And, you like to think that in our school, courses in these more selective electives, if you get into the 13 to 15 range, you start wondering. If you start getting under 10, then you have to make decisions about whether we have the resources to funnel money in that direction when we need to maintain class sizes in those courses where most of our students are enrolled. So I hope I'm giving a clear sense of the answer. We drop a course when when they're undersubscribed, not offered, or when the numbers are significantly low, which is typically can be under 12 consistently.
So 12 is when you start to
Again,
evaluate?
I want to give you a magic.
You saw where I was going. I saw you.
I'm trying to help you out. I'm trying to give you a sense.
I told you not. I saw you trying not to say that.
Well, as I've shared with the Board of Education, we've used past practice models to section our high school. I don't know if the Board of Finance has heard this response from me that at this time last year, we were making sectioning decisions based on our past practice certified staffing ratios. And then, of course, the reductions that occurred after March of last year led to reductions in certified staffing, which I talked about in our last workshop. The net effect where I'm going with this is we're going to have to be very careful this March for the first time, truly for the first time, in making more I'll use the term draconian decisions about perhaps not offering courses that fall at a magic point, and I don't know where it is, where we may have to say to our students that, hey, this is a nice course, but we don't have the enrollment. It's not going to be offered next year because we've got to put the FTE into the courses that most students are taking. Now, the thing you need to be careful about is those kids still need to go somewhere. They don't suddenly have a free period. But the hope might be that they'll go into courses where you have more students enrolled. And there's a reality that the more students that are enrolled in a course, the greater efficiency you have in how you can staff it. It's very complex to understand, but I just want to alert the board that we're going to have to do it differently this March than the way we've been doing it since I've been at the high school.
I think we mentioned this in some prior discussion at some point, but is there any thinking about when there is very, very low demand for a course and it's an advanced course, looking into possibly an online alternative?
In the past, we've pursued that with some courses that, in fact, are going in the other direction, courses that we might introduce into our program. So to think about it in the other way, where if you had a very small number, that there might be a possibility of providing an online opportunity, that I wouldn't walk away from that. We would take a look at it. I think that you have to be very careful about whether that online experience is going to equate to the kind of experience you're going to get over 180 days
Sure.
with a teacher in front of you, particularly in those courses that require, the sciences, for example, world language, very difficult to capture the essence of those courses online.
But to the extent that they're undersubscribed and may not then be worthwhile offering in a student-teacher setting, is it, do you consider the opportunity to offer it online and/or in a partnership with Continuing Ed or other entities that might be willing to pick up that service when the public system is not able to offer it? Because at some point, it's the best public education possible for the best possible dollar that the public can afford. And so in that respect, when it's undersubscribed for whatever reason, does the school look at opportunities to provide that beyond the confines of what its mandate is?
There's two policy implications. One is there is precedent to try to leverage Continuing Ed to offer opportunities for students. We've done that in the world languages because you have some flexibility around certification. You have to remember that we're an accredited high school and that to reward credit, you have to have the work be monitored by a certified teacher. So the Continuing Ed piece gets difficult. On the online piece, we have budgeted monies for online learning, but to this point, we have only used that funding for students on homebound instruction on occasion or students through IEPs. All other opportunities for online instruction have been funded by the student's family. So my sense is that the Board of Education, I don't know if it gets to that level or not, I'd have to consult with Dr. Richards. We'd have to make a policy decision about if we're going to use online learning to support an undersubscribed course, we're going to have to make a decision about whether we're going to pay for that. And that opens up some access issues. It opens up a whole conversation that I think goes well beyond tonight's workshop.
So just to follow on, if I might, to the extent that we're accredited, and I appreciate all of that, there state programs exist already that provide for exams in lieu of. So to the extent that students might take advantage but outside the confines of WPS, and is there an opportunity for the public school system to offer the exams in lieu of that provided for the credit and therefore met the accreditation requirements? For example, for accredited universities, they offer CLEP exams when you take certain individualized programs outside the university system. But if you take the CLEP exam at the end of that and you pass it, you're given credit, and the university for which that has given it and under which you've taken that exam, they are given credit for having provided that.
I'm not aware of any such opportunity. That we have addressed on occasion the question of whether a student could be tutored over the summer by some independent individual or agency and then take some type of Wilton High School exit exam to receive credit, and we've determined that the answer is no, that the work, the full breadth and depth of the work must be under the supervision of a certified teacher.
Okay.
A couple clarification questions.
Yep.
In the section where we asked what the ramifications of some of the past cuts are, there's a line that says, Administrator, we eliminated the Assistant Director of Special Services position. And in the salary worksheet that you sent us, unless I'm crazy, which is possible, there is an Assistant Director of Special Services, so
We had
we had two. Why did we add an unbudgeted .2 FTE secretary of special services last year? The answer says we identified an increased need for clerical support, which is sort of an answer, but I'm if you can elaborate on that. Why? What is the increased need for clerical support?
Answer the question, so I guess it's your question.
Okay, I guess I'll take it. We're tossing it back and forth. The special services secretaries, as you know, at each of the building levels are responsible for feeding information into the state reporting system, scheduling the PPTs, the team meetings. Because of the number of these transactions that we had, the special services secretary was not able to do the work in the 4 days and was going, needing additional time.
Is this new reporting requirements or additional kids?
We do have additional reporting requirements for the state. We report more times on more factors, plus the maintenance of the IEP direct system, so there were additional duties.
Related. Increased operating costs. Per pupil costs have increased in the past 10 years for many factors, including but not limited to ... increasing need for guidance counselors and social workers. Just a quick elaboration on the increasing need for guidance counselors and social workers.
I think we're seeing many more, and the principals can speak to this more comprehensively than I can. I think we're seeing many more cases of kids who are very troubled and who are dealing with social emotional issues. There's been an increase in the numbers of kids who are medicated or on medications. We're just seeing a more difficult environment. I think the economy has probably exacerbated some of this, but we're seeing a lot of acting out behaviors that affect kids' abilities to access the learning. So, and these cases are not cases that some of them you might spend days on one kid, and that's been the problem. Is just the caseload that we're triaging, for example, at the high school with the social worker we have there, who's really having to put kids off longer than we should because she just can't handle the caseload.
I have one item also, Dr. Richards. As you know, we have students on 1204 plans. That's a part of the Veteran Disabilities Act. And the guidance counselors in the different building levels. We have hundreds of students in the district on 504 accommodation plans that need to be monitored. And the guidance counselors primarily are the point persons for that, which is a very, important responsibility and takes quite a bit of their time. But again, it's an unfunded mandate that's falling in their purview.
All right, clarification. Laptops. I didn't really get an answer to that question. There are, unless I'm reading the technology report wrong, there are 30 desktop stations. Is that correct?
These are for administrative, so
Just at the district level now.
no, they go out to the buildings. They go out to administrative. They're not used by students.
No, they're in the district budget as opposed to the individual school. Each school has a
Right.
technology budget. The district budget called for 30 desktop
Right.
stations.
We just take the administrative computers as the district budget. We don't
All the
allocate them.
computers get budgeted through the district budget, not in these schools.
So when I see
The schools get the student computers.
I see,
We
okay.
take the
Okay,
administrative
okay, I get you.
computers.
All right. So number of stations at Miller Driscoll, 33. That doesn't refer to any that are in the office. Those are all
Correct.
classrooms.
Can I just follow up on the laptop? So we don't have, I've seen before where you have like what I want to call a laptop cart, where you might have enough laptops for a classroom and the teacher can pull it in. Do we not have those?
We had one at Cider Mill some years ago, but the schools have elected to have computer labs rather than have the carts, and we don't.
Okay.
part of it's, we need a real robust wireless system for them to work effectively, and that was why that one didn't work very
Okay.
well.
Oh, okay.
And
So if a teacher wants to do some computer-based lesson, you just go into the, you
Into-
sign up for
they
the
sign up
lab
for the
time
lab-
and you
lab
use it? Okay.
And to the math of it, is my math incorrect if I'm looking at
you're not, the laptop, to get the same specs as the towers, run around $2,000, plus we purchased a docking station because the administrators want to have the ability to have it as a station where they have a full monitor and a keyboard and a mouse, and then pop it out when they need to go to a meeting or.
So about $2,600 a laptop. Sounds about right.
It's somewhere
Slightly
around.
less than that.
It's a little bit less than that, but it's.
And it says, I wrote a 3-year replacement schedule because I assumed that was what it was. And in the answer, it says laptops are used by staff members for a lease cycle and returned after 4 years. Is it a 3-year or 4-year cycle?
It's,
We pay for it for 3 years, use it for 4 years.
4 years.
they give us, in part of our lease agreement, we get an extended warranty for 4 years.
I just had one follow-up question, and it's number 13 on one of these documents, and I'll just paraphrase it. My question had to do with the, I guess, already started enrollment declines that are going to start to accelerate to some degree. And my question was really around how much looking forward do you do anticipating how the enrollment declines are going to be coming, certainly starting at the early grades, and what you do in terms of positions, staffing, to get out in advance of that. And the answer was basically, here's how we calculate teachers. That's probably about the only thing that I half understand. I probably could have worded the question a little bit better. It's more the administrative, secretarial, the non-teaching positions that, I was curious, how much do you look out, anticipate what's coming, and plan not necessarily for this year's budget, but, when cuts are going to be happening and where they're going to be happening.
It's a good question. When I answered that question, I did give you the math on how we calculate our teaching staff
Right.
for the following year, which is, we think, the most important thing because that's the highest dollars, obviously, and the only thing that we really impact is next year's budget when we look at the enrollment projections. We haven't seen large enough, I think, and the principals probably speak to this, large enough declines to affect other support staffing yet. I suppose if we looked out at the elementary levels 8 or 10 years, we might have that opportunity, but that's still quite a ways off, and we're not sure what the rest of the education world will look like at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to pinpoint, 5 years out, we'll be at a point where we can, stop doing this. Not everything is affected by enrollment going up or down. We've had enrollment increases in recent years at the high school and at Middlebrook and haven't increased secretarial
Right.
staffing.
Yeah.
And the same can be said with,
And I understand certainly there's, regardless of the number of kids in a school, you're probably always going to need a principal, so some of those things wouldn't change at all. But
most likely.
I may not get these numbers exactly right, but in the pre-K through 5th or 6th grade or 8th grade, over the next 2 years, I think there's going to be about a 10% enrollment decline. Which, would seem to me fairly significant enough that, I would hope that there would be the ability to cut back in some of the non-teaching areas, knowing that the wave's coming.
I think that's certainly possible and certainly something we'd look at. And I know that at that level, enrollment decreases also, when you get to certain thresholds anyway, affect the staffing for the specials, the art and the phys ed and other things like that also, which we do consider every year.
I'll follow up
We've
on.
been cutting
on-
accordingly as bubbles come. We'll cut. You may cut some second grade sections. Sometimes if that big second grade goes to a third grade, you.
Yeah, that I understand. That I understand as
Yeah.
well. Some things will
Right.
have to follow along.
And I think we have a record of showing where we've cut based on enrollment and continue to do so. Maintain appropriate class size.
I'll follow on Jim's question, if I may. I think we must have asked a similar question in a different context.
I know this one wasn't quite worded the way I worded mine, so I assume it got
We can go back
combined.
through afterwards and look at it. But the context in which I was trying to get at that was as part of the trying to look out 3 years. But, even with something like this, you have the different grades going in waves. And, where there will be a point where there's one end of the spectrum that's declining and another end that's increasing, or vice versa. And so it was really an attempt to try to get a handle on whether we could at least see if that would lead to diminishing somewhat the staff. The building's always going to be here. But whether that would have a major effect on the budget as a whole going out, or whether it would all even out. And it's part of making assumptions for the future, but that was what I was attempting to get at by including that. Is it something that it's possible to look at? Will we have major fluctuations in the staffing budget?
I mean, I can go through and do the math about how many FTEs we would need to maintain the same class size, if that's helpful.
I think it probably is. Whether they're teachers or not.
The problem.
No, you're not interested, you're not really talking about teachers, I don't think.
No,
I
I mean,
think,
it's-
Jim, what I hear Jim and Gail talking about is,
It's the
I
total
mean,
budget envelope.
you may not have
What's it-
added staff as you grew over the past couple years, but if I go back far enough, as this school system enrollment grew, the cost, outside of teacher cost, also grew. And I think the question is, as it goes the other way, where are the break points that it can be ratcheted down? I think that's what I'm hearing Jim and.
Or can it be?
Well, if you look at last
Or
year,
can it
I
be?
mean,
Or should
last
it be?
year, last year we had, what, 23.5 that FTEs that were released. Of those, I believe 8 were teachers, 9 were teachers, so those who weren't released were not teachers, so those who were released were not teachers. So there is a paring away as the situation changes.
I think too, it depends where the staffing is. I think one of the problems when you look at staffing that's increased, for example, the paraprofessional ranks, it's been two areas. One has been with special needs, and that's again part of the problem of projecting forward, because you don't know what your needs are going to be in terms of the severity of cases that present themselves. And we budget, and the budget goes to the vote in May, and you could have huge changes in the summer based on needs. So it's really hard to quantify where you're going to go with staffing. The other area that we've used the paraprofessionals has been in the literacy program, and I suspect what will happen is that we'll end up cutting those literacy aides that are working with small groups of kids in the 90-minute literacy blocks. As times go forward, I think we'll probably end up losing them, and if we have to convert them into special or convert them into special ed paraprofessionals. So hard to quantify exactly where that breakpoint's going to be, but I think we will do it as enrollment decreases. But we've been the last several years, it's been 1.5% decrease. That's not a huge number of bodies across the entire system of 4,300 roughly kids.
I guess if you do multi-year projections, you answer those questions.
Yeah.
Well, but you can't, Lynn. You can't. I can't project. Right? If I
I
could,
know you can on special needs, but
special
on
needs,
other
and
things
that's
you
a
can.
hugely
No, I
intensive
understand
part
that,
of what we're
but
doing.
other than special needs, I think you can. I'm looking at the numbers right here, to Jim's point about the change in the enrollment, and I look at the numbers that you provided, and I look at the actual for 2011, K through 5 is 1,948 students, and in the projection you gave us for 14-15, it's 1,657. You can certainly do projections with those numbers. I get the special need that you don't know that, but with all the other students, you can certainly do some projections going forward related to that. I just think you can.
Sometimes you can also think in terms of what is a worst case, what is a,
Yeah, what's a best, what's a
extreme
worst,
what's an extreme best.
It's a range.
Want to jump to transportation for a second, if I
Sure.
can? A more entertaining topic, I guess. So, in just looking at the questions 6 and 7 related to the buses, and I'm looking at the cost for the buses, for the regular route buses of roughly $70,000 per bus, and we've got 34 of those buses. And we talked a little bit at our last session that there were policies that were mandated by the state, and as a result of that constrained us from making any decisions. And there were self-imposed policies that we as a town have levied on ourselves. And we asked what those were, and the response was that in essence the only mandated policies were those as it related to the special needs, and 40-minute, I think, is the bus ride, if I'm not mistaken, but it's 1 hour, excuse me, 1 hour? But the others are self-imposed. So if we were to extend the rider time, right now we've set as a policy 40 minutes.
No, our bell times dictate that.
But bell times are policy as well. So we've set a policy of bell times. So assuming that there is elasticity in the bell times, because I think it was 7 or 8 years ago we had some elasticity and made some adjustments. So assuming that for argument's sake, if we were to adjust that so that ridership were 1 hour, do we know what the decrease in bus needs would be? Because at 70,000, if we were to reduce 5 buses, we could pick up 350,000 and save some classes and positions. So I'm just curious as to.
I think the start time, though, Al, I think, you know, to do the start time that we have now, and to have kids not being picked up at 6:30 in the morning, you know, we agreed we would not pick up kids before 7. So that drives the amount of time. And if you use your term elasticity, unless you're going to have elementary kids starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, which I don't think would be good on lots of levels. That's part of our issue with that. I also think realistically, and knowing what we know about this community, is that you make bus rides an hour long, and we will have gridlock at every campus because
I
it
completely
just
agree.
We will not wash.
I completely agree.
And that's a problem. We're trying to have kids ride more now, but I think that would
Which
really
actually leads me
exacerbate.
to a second question, but I'd just be curious as to, we have a lot of buses because there's overlap as a result of routing and bell times. Is that not correct?
I don't know what you mean by that.
So we have buses on the road that are delivering students at the same time there are buses on the road picking up students.
No, they're the
Oh,
same
so-
buses.
So they're the same, so even
It's
if
the
we were to
same
extend the
buses.
bell window, we'd have the same number of buses on the road?
Yeah, the thing that drives is the number of tiers that you have. So we've got a 3-tier system. So you're dividing your student body that you're delivering to school into 3 groupings.
Well, I guess the extended bell window, all it would, we're not at capacity on any of the buses, or at least not from where I
So
live
it
here.
depends on the route. Some are.
So we might pick up some savings if we were extended. I'm just trying to get my arms around that. I'm not saying that it's something viable. I don't know that the town would even, I can tell you my wife wouldn't be willing to have my children ride the buses that long, so I'm with you on that. I'm just curious.
Well,
as-
and if we could, Al, I think one of the things to point out, if we could save that, the kind of money you're talking about by doing buses, that's, without the other trade-offs, we would do that. I mean, so we're not looking to say, let's just maintain this fleet at X number. But this is a pretty tough topography, and you and I have talked a lot about
Right.
the challenges of that.
And then just stick on buses for one more question too. We have a number of students and parents that bring their students to school by car. So to the extent that it's possible, and perhaps it's not by mandate or whatever the case may be, is it possible for parents or students to opt out of the buses? And as a result of opting out by contract, however that's formulated, reduce the need for buses?
I think that Wilton tried that before my time here, and I think what happens when you do the opt-out is that people want to reserve the right. And so because they even if they're, say, an elementary parent that drives their kid, they say, gee, there's going to be times when we're gone, and I want my kid to have the bus service. And so what they found is that when they did that, it was not such, and other communities that have tried to opt out, it's not been successful.
The cost savings, we've
experience.
talked to about 4 or 5 districts in the last month or so who have tried opt-out, and they haven't saved anything worth even writing on a piece of paper.
Really?
The amount
Yeah,
of money,
doesn't-
because parents aren't willing to commit to doing it, and there's a lot of paperwork in terms of tracking who's in, who's out, changing the bus route every other day, because parents can opt out and then opt back in. So it's a lot of headache for very little savings.
Okay.
Could you require parents to purchase a sticker in order to drop their kids off at school or come and pick them up as a deterrent to get?
Nothing will deter them.
No, I know, but, at least they're, I mean, none of my friends on
Need another campus supervisor.
You need to arm the ones you.
Well, we'll just move the ones from the high school over to the elementary school.
I don't know, I'm sorry, but I feel there's a cost associated. I have gone by Middlebrook and Cider, I've seen the mess that it is. And, so there is a cost at school associated with the parents. And, my neighbors all did it. They'll kill me for saying this in public, but they did it because they didn't want their kid riding the bus. We only live a mile from the school. So I don't know, it doesn't seem inappropriate to try to recoup some of those costs. We provide the bus, they don't want to take it, well, then you've got to share in the cost that we're incurring because you choose to drop your kid off at school. Oh, well.
So my friend Ken Dartley has the idea, he wants toll bridges in each of
That'd be an easy pass.
Get a speed pass, exactly.
I'm with him on that.
Fully electronic.
Yeah, we pay for use the roads in New
Are you
York.
still going?
No, I'm good right now.
You going?
You get one?
Yeah, back and wait.
These are just follow-ups, so.
Yeah, so.
All right, the line 3310 breakdown, Ken, just quick questions. Joy Brewster and Associates,
Special ed.
special ed, and Meliora Academy, so.
What's that?
Meliora Academy,
Special ed.
special ed. And these are the schools that we send the kids to, or these are
No, these
in-house?
are behaviorists. They're providing behavioral services to the students with autism because we don't have business staff, so we contract out for that.
Okay, so all right, gotcha. And the psychologist question,
That's in you all.
I asked about outsourcing, and it said that, I don't have a piece of paper in front of me, it said that they complete roughly 100 assessments. Is that collectively, as a group, 100 assessments, or that's per psychologist?
No, absolutely.
And there were 11 psychologists, there's salaries of about $700,000, that's not right?
There are, roughly 11 psychologists.
So if they're doing 100 assessments at $3,500 each, which I assume we could get down if we did a large number outsourced, that still seems like a savings over the $700,000 payroll.
Well, that's only a portion of what they do. I mean, psychologists by IEP mandate provide counseling services, so we have to outsource other counseling services. We do support to families. There are a lot of facets. The assessment portion is probably only a third of the work that they do.
Do any schools outsource their psychology?
I'm not aware of any district that does at all.
That's one question. Second question, the IL positions, the three that were mentioned, the guidance department IL positions, there were three. One was about a $15,000 stipend for 15 additional days, and the other was the other two were $12,000 stipends for 12 additional days. So I'm just wondering about that $1,000 a day figure, is that, I'm assuming it's contractually negotiated, where does it come from? Is 12 days an estimate of the amount of time spent, 1 hour here, 1 hour there? What goes into $1,000 a day?
It far precedes me, because it was in the contract for many years since the start of the IL position. I don't know how the initial starting salary was arrived at, but it has been built on with wage increases through multiple contracts. So
It seems like a high number.
Well, one should not assume, though, that.
it's not just 12 days.
That was my saying, yeah.
One shouldn't assume that the stipend is purely associated with the additional days that instructional leaders have to work in the summer. They're working diligently beyond their day job
Right.
to support leadership of their departments throughout the school year. But there is an additional responsibility over days beyond their 187-day contractual obligation.
I just read the job description, it says 15 additional days, so I didn't know whether that was an actual measure of time worked or that was just...
It's the additional days they have to work beyond their contract, but they also have to,
Plus before school, after school,
Yeah.
weekends,
there's an array of duties
during
during the year.
during the school year. They have prep time, lunchtime.
Here we have IL listed. And we have a IL fairly detailed responsibility listed.
I'll just jump in for a quick check. Question 10 on the initial round of questions as it related, I had asked a question about if we deferred musts in that. So we had a point of which where we deferred things until we had to replace them, must replace them. But the narrative, the response narrative seemed to indicate that we were deferring past the drop dead date. Is that the case?
You're talking about textbooks?
Textbooks. So the question, just so I can clarify, the question said we had continued to defer things. I look at the schedule of deferments, which is disheartening to say the least, and in there are some textbooks as well. So the question was, we can defer things to a point where we can no longer defer. We actually must purchase. And at what point do we reach the must purchase point? But the narrative seemed to imply we had gone past the must purchase point for some of these.
That wasn't the intent.
Okay.
You know, I think in my role that certainly if I felt that it was a must purchase, we would.
Okay.
So there's a calculation as to whether we can defer. It's just important to recognize that, as is stated in the response, that in certain content areas, social studies and science primarily, you do reach a point where the content obviously isn't up to date. So we haven't reached that point yet where I've actually said to Dr. Richards, we must have these books.
Okay. So that was my concern, because the narrative implied that we've done that in a few areas. I was a little concerned about that, needless to say.
Just on that, while we're on the textbook issue, there was a report, I think it was on the news, about a school in New York, I don't remember which borough, that was actually not purchasing textbooks anymore and using computers, and found it much more cost effective to update the data on the computer than to purchase a new textbook every time you needed to purchase a new textbook. And I was wondering what our thinking is along those lines.
Well, we certainly increasingly are looking at the potential of purchasing online textbooks as we move forward. It's certainly, I think, what the future holds. But the initial indications that have come our way is that certainly on the initial purchase, there's not a cost savings. The publishers are too savvy to create that atmosphere. Now, whether there's longer-term savings because you simply can update a version of an online textbook, I'm not sure about that. But again, I don't know if Matt can add to that. Our initial look at it is you don't save money on the front end.
And again, there are some schools that have gone that direction, but are they comparison schools to us? Do they offer a curriculum with the same rigor that we do? Does it meet the standards that we expect from our curriculum? I don't know. I don't know about.
Yeah, I don't know. This happened to be, I think, an elementary school as it was, so.
There was a district in Florida
but-
as well that had just done that, and they've got their.
The initial findings are, it's sort of a wait and see. When the domino's going to fall when Texas or California goes that way, and then they're going to rush to drive down the prices for everybody. Unfortunately, the colleges are getting there now, but they're finding that the students are preferring the books still because they like to write in them and they like to highlight them, they like to have them. And when you purchase them right now, the cost structure is such that you buy a subscription and it actually automatically deletes off of your iPad or your laptop. And so after 180 days, even if you took diligent notes on your iPad, they're gone. So until the publishers have figured this out, there's not that big cost savings yet. The nice thing though is when you do buy a new set now, most of them are giving you the digital one for free, so the kids who have that big biology textbook can go use the online one when they're home, so they don't have to throw out their back carrying all those textbooks home. But we're just not quite there yet.
And I assume it's still maybe a little early in the learning curve. Not that, so this is not a cost question, it's more of a learning question in terms of when kids use online material versus hardcovers. Is there any more evidence to suggest that the learning process is equal to, better than, worse than? And it's probably not, and I realize there's not one answer that fits all. It might have to do by curriculum and course and.
Yeah, I would say that the jury's still out because there's not enough. There's not enough schools doing it to test it out.
Yeah.
And frankly, the textbooks aren't up to speed where they're animated and visually engaging.
I think there is some research out that's a little disconcerting about the number of hours that teenagers are spending online and texting, and I've seen just huge hourly expenditures of time, and how that's affecting their ability to think deeply and thoughtfully about something. We're getting to a point where we're just dealing in sound bites and tweets as opposed to really thinking.
Well, I could sure understand why we wouldn't necessarily want to be the guinea pigs, even if it seemed to be cost effective, that you'd want to make sure that nothing was getting compromised along the way.
Go ahead. No, you finished? Go ahead.
No, I just had a question on page 18. I think it's associated with question 14, and it's at the bottom there. It's the second bullet and the second white bullet after the first black bullet. It's one of the performance is clear evidence of longitudinal improvement of our student cohorts, and I was just wondering what longitudinal improvement is.
Yeah, it's just one of the. Sorry for using that. I forget I gotta speak in normal terms here. One of the things that we've been looking at, Warren, is to try to get away from looking at year to year. The media has loved to look at how the fourth graders last year did compared to the fourth graders this year. And what's more important, and I think, this is online, our testing report on our website, is that what we want to do is we want to track the progress, the growth of a class of kids over time. So we're looking at how did they do at third grade, and what improvements did they make in fourth grade and fifth grade, so that we can see what are the trend lines, what are the areas where we haven't made the improvement, where are the areas where we're regressing perhaps. So one of the things you'll see in the report is that we've really tracked some of these kids, and some of it's a little difficult on some of the standardized measures because the versions have changed, and the test that was modified and changed a little bit, but you really see steady growth over time of kids as they move through the system. So that's what we felt that was really important data to have, and not surprisingly, and some states do this. Connecticut hasn't done this yet. Is to track the improvement of kids longitudinally and as well as those kids who are new to the system. So you have, how many kids were here K-12, and how did they fare over time against kids who came in later in the system. So you get some additional measures, but that's what that's referring to.
Okay.
We're really looking at these cohort groups, and some cohorts are stronger than others too. And that, so we're trying to see how do you smooth that out, because we see huge changes year to year sometimes with groups of kids. So we're looking to see what we can do to address that.
I actually had written a star down next to that because it was that was one of the measures that I thought, hey, this is going to be extremely useful to us. The I'm probably partially, I think we all had some play into each of these questions, but I'm probably partially responsible for whatever agony all of you went through to answer some of that section. Sorry. Again, the idea of this, I must say, I now know more than I've ever wanted to know about how you might measure educational performance, and it's a wonderful outline of that. But I think what would be most useful, and here I wasn't just thinking of us and the work we have to do, but also for people in town to be able to really get some idea of this, is to look again at what were you aiming at in certain areas in terms of performance. You can't do it overall, but if you isolate certain of these metrics and certain cohorts or certain areas of activity, like certain academic areas,
Right.
and then you look at, okay, what were the measures we took to get there?
Right.
How much did they cost? What was the result we were aiming at? How much did all the things we did to get there approximately cost? How far away are we from getting there, or were we from getting there, and how did that change over time? That's, again, if you could just look at some of these, any of these, and provide people in town and provide us on the Board of Finance with a notion of that, in addition to, just telling us how are some of the ways that this might be evaluated. That's what would, I think, be most helpful.
Well, in the plan, one of the things, I don't know if we can get it quite as granular as you'd like it.
There's certain parts that you'd want us to pay attention to, and others
Yeah,
that you
and
wouldn't.
I think one of the things we've done, when we're spending a lot more time in the profession, I think, looking at data, and we have data teams in each school that it used to be that you'd get in our profession, and I'm not proud of this, is that there would be results and they'd look at them and put them in a file. And I think for years, we've been, many years, predates my time here, because Dave was huge on looking at data and still spends a lot of time in that area. But with the data points that we get on the assessments, we look at, and each of the schools do it in the core disciplines, and we look at their action plan, summer, when we get the data back from the state that we take in March, and we get it back in July or August, which is incredible in and of itself. And we look at the results, and we say, okay, what are the improvement plans we need to make, and here are the steps we're going to take. Now, we haven't tracked it down to, we spent $25.30, and I don't mean to make your point seem silly, but
larger envelope.
I don't think we've looked at it that way. We've looked at our training programs, and we've tried to gear the professional development programs for areas where we think we need to improve, and so we have those costs. And we set targets, goals, and here are the things we're going to work on, because based on the analysis of the data, it looks like kids are not, in the critical reading subtests, they're not performing at the level. So what are we going to do with reading instruction? What are we going to do? And there are strands, depending on the measurements that you use, that give you analysis of how the cohort has done, how individuals have done with respect to specific skills subsets, and we try to address those. So I think we're really trying to look at how do we take the data and use it to drive our instruction.
We're unfortunately in a scenario where we have to look at, where we have to try to align that as well with, you know, what it costs. And I know that's a hard thing to do, and I know it's sort of amorphous, but ultimately people have to pay for it and know what they're paying for. And so I think again, in the guise of making that something that everyone in town can look at and evaluate and judge whether they're getting what they're putting in, or whether they need to put in more to get what they wanted, or whether they put in too much and actually, you know, it's diminishing returns, and you need to align the two. And I think we're still searching for the way to do that.
You know, I think one of the things is in a high-performing district is what it is. It's harder to demonstrate increments at the top levels. We're always striving to do that, and you never want to stop trying to get better. But I think it's so when you look at a kind of cost-benefit analysis, there are probably, you know, some significant costs associated with moving that last whatever that last increment is. And I, for one, would not ever want to see us stop trying to do that.
Well, I understand that, but then there may be some cases where you might see a decline.
Absolutely, and
you have to document that as well.
I think that Dr. Richards has spoken to that. I think the data that we have, we use as a diagnostic. we are always evaluating that data on a regular basis in terms of how do you address how do you maintain the strengths? How do you address the weaknesses if they are there?
And it gets down to the individual. That's what the teachers are doing. They're looking at these at the test scores by individual, so the teachers that are getting the students in, they'll know what they have to work on. That, to me, is where the interest is and the concern is improving that child from year to year to year.
And when you're talking about the individuals, and Dr. Richards referred to strands, the strands of the test, we will have the ability, and we do have the ability, to look at individual strands of weakness for each individual student. So a classroom teacher at the elementary school level has a class of 22 students, let's say, and they will have the ability to look at the weakness of every student and differentiate for every individual student. That's what we're starting to look at, which we were not looking at, and I don't know of school systems that did 5 years ago. Like as Dr. Richards said, we'd get test results, and not all of the teachers would have that specific data. And now we're working on having every teacher look at that data.
Well, I am still searching in this for, and I think that's valuable, but I'm still searching in here for a way to translate this into what is being invested and what is the result, and is it what you're aiming for? Is it less? Is it more?
I don't know if it's that simple, Gail, cost of benefit analysis. But it's not you know.
But we have to make it that simple at some point.
Well, I don't think it's has any integrity for us to make cause and effect statements where you can't prove the cause and effect. And I think that's the biggest problem that we have in education. I think we're looking to do a more or a better job at that, but I don't think we can prove. I think there's too many variables to single out one thing and to say, well, gee, we spent $2,000 on staff development, and was that worth our money? You know, obviously we want to try and target it on the areas where we believe kids have needs, the greatest needs, and to try to prioritize how we're doing that. But I don't think you can quantify it in terms of the cause and effect that you're asking for. I just don't think you can do it.
If I can just jump in for a second, if you don't quantify it the way Gail's asking for, and
you do quantify it in terms of overall results,
sure,
but I don't think you can.
Let's all agree that it's an imperfect science at best,
Right.
and that we're all taking mad stabs that, you know, this was worth it and this wasn't.
Right.
Let's agree
Well,
that
it's more than a mad stab.
let's agree that deep down we have no idea.
Throwing darts.
Yeah.
Gee, let's try this.
Yeah. At some point, when you run out of money and you can only do 3 out of these 5 things, it's not a bad thing to have spent enough time watching the darts land to at least feel comfortable saying, well, these are the three that we
We do
should
that.
keep.
We
Okay,
do that. And
that's-
I think that's a legitimate, suggestion, and it's not lost on us. Especially as resources become, less, you have to do that prioritization. And I think that's a fear that we have, is that you scale back some of the opportunities for training and some of the curriculum time, and we have done that. And we've prioritized it to where we think we need to spend the most time.
Can I speak to the process for a second?
Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's, I think it's a little depressing, but it's it's still the elephant in the room, and that is, I learn a lot every year with this, but there's this element of, us, for whatever weird benighted reason, trying to chip in and saying, well, how about this? And the answer is, no, we need that. And how about that? Well, no, we need that. And eventually it comes back to this point where we're just left to say, well, here's how much money we have, good luck. And I have it on, hang on one second, I have it on here. Yes. So this year, Lynn did this. Did you share it already or not?
She can't read your mind, Annie.
What did you ask me to do today?
Yeah.
I did not share it with anybody, other than the people
All
that
right,
were
so
on
here's this year.
You want to pass that around?
Well, yeah, this is all I got. Did you print one or?
You didn't get iPads?
Did you ask me to print extra
I
copies?
did.
I was good duty.
I asked you like 5 o'clock.
I was good duty.
So this is
Who are we
what.
giving these to?
I don't know, I've got that.
She's passing them around.
I
Just
got
saluting.
copies.
This is what this year looks like. It's Board of Ed increases: Westport 2.4%, Weston 1.27%, Reading 3.4%, New Canaan 3.3, being asked to make it 3.18, Ridgefield 2.9,
Being asked to make it 0, by the way.
yeah, Easton
These are all
2.3,
preliminary.
yeah, Norwalk 4.25, Town Council said no 2.4, and Greenwich 3.25. So those are the surrounding towns this year, and for us to hear, and by the way, Gary, this is addressed at, not the administration, this is addressed at the Board of Ed, because if I were sitting in your shoes, my job would be to preserve at all, at every effort, what I had. That's your job, you do it well. So that's not a surprise. But the rest of the Board of Ed, to hear we need a 5.3% increase or our kids' education is at risk of being destroyed, I find not particularly helpful and not particularly realistic. So
I don't think we ever said destroy it.
no, but it gets very dire. I mean, I looked at the cuts to 4.9. I look at the cuts to 4.3. They start getting, bleaker and bleaker. And there is rhetoric that surrounds these cuts that sounds pretty bad. But I think you missed a pretty big opportunity not to come at us with a longer-term projection and some thought. I'm going to go back to something I said a month ago, which is we didn't get here overnight. We've been seeing this coming for 4 years. We're not getting out of it without teachers on the same side of the table as a solution, because that's where most of the money's going. Not just the money. There's quality issues that a lot of parents in town are lined up behind and willing to back up with more tax dollars as well. And those are part of I don't see how we're getting out of the situation we're in this year, just like every single town around us, without either looking at the current WA contract or without looking at money being fronted this year by taxpayers in return for a reasonable 3-year solution. I really don't. I mean, forget user fees, that's $200,000-$300,000. It's not, there's really only two things that will put a significant dent in getting a budget that we can work with this year that doesn't cause that kind of dislocation. And I would just throw it out there. Please feel free to disagree with me. I think I'm being unfair. I haven't seen a huge willingness to work with us on either of those two things. And it is what it is. And I would feel remiss if I spent the entire evening just asking how we can save $10,000 for laptops, because that's really not getting us where we need to go. That was it.
I think it would be useful to have on here also the amounts that were budgeted and approved the previous 2 years.
They're about the same. We were.
Okay, but I think it'd be, I think Wilton's pretty much
We
on
talked
the
about
bottom
that
for the
walking
last
in.
two.
I'm gonna add that.
We're not at the
Last
bottom,
year.
we're right in the middle for the last 3 years. At the high end of the middle. We have the number.
We have them. I can just consolidate them. I'll do it.
But it's also important to look at the asks, because I think that what Andy's talking to is process. And if the asks are considerably different than the eventual settled-on rate. So what he's talking about now in that spread is really, in essence, the ask, because none of that's been settled on.
I don't know, the process may be the same for all I know. I don't sit in on the other town meetings. It may be exactly the same thing. I would think in some of these towns, there's probably a little more give and take and a little more coming to a number that's mutually agreeable, as part of a discussion. I would think it's probably true. And in some towns, maybe it's not. I know Darien, they're at each other with knives. But in some towns, they're not.
Now, Weston came in at 1 point something this year. I don't think they're going to have a lot of discussion on
Well,
it.
on their own.
It's well received.
I wish the process looked a little more like that.
Yeah, I think you also have to remember that the communities are at different stages at different points in time that allow them, and you're not talking about enormous fluctuations, you're talking about 1 and 2% differences here. And a community that has just built its schools and has the opportunity to build in the technology into the bonding issue has some relief in terms of its operating budget. There are all kinds of considerations when you start drilling down into it, and that's what you've got to do. We have enough understanding in conveying what our budget to you at this point. I think trying to understand what's going on in 6 other communities is a daunting task.
I know, unless we're comparing DRG,
Right.
where we look good.
That's all we got.
The issue, Dick, is salaries are the big part of the cost, and there's at least 2 others of those towns who are in the exact same place time-wise on their teacher contract. We're all going to be renegotiating the teacher contract in this upcoming year. And I'm just looking at my notes here to see who they are. But that's where the big costs are, and at least 2 of them are in exactly the same place. So, I hear you, but that's, the driver of the cost is the salaries. And, that argument holds water, except every single one of these towns came in lower. I don't know how you make that argument across the board for everybody. Yes, for one example, I could say maybe, but not across the board, everybody.
I'm going to say that you take our 2 previous years and factor in what we've asked for here.
Well,
We're talking
we'll
about
get that
2.5%
information.
compounded
We'll get
increase
the
over 3
information.
years.
We weren't out of line last year, either.
Okay, well, that's-
I promise you, we're right up the middle, year after year. We're never at the low end.
And 2 or 3% is a couple of $1 million. It's not. It's
a lot of money.
If you look at it, when you talk about a percent, that seems so nominal, but you're talking about $700,000. 2 or 3% is $2 million. I mean, it is. So it's not an incremental amount of money. It's a considerable amount of money, and we're looking at the difference in asks. They're closer to 3 and 4%, not 2 and 3%. On the ask, right? So if we get one, and I'm going low end to us, so you're looking at 1 point versus 5 point, or you're looking at 2 point versus 5 point on the ask. It's a considerable sum of money.
But Warren, to your point, Darien came in higher than we did, and we have virtually identical teachers' contracts.
Yes, but I know, and that's just the same time frame. That's one
It's
of
the
the
same
towns.
time frame,
But you
right.
know why they came in higher? It's all special education costs. 100% of it is special
80
education
extra.
costs. And if I was in Darien and, you know, I was a regular ed parent, it'd be a cause of concern, because of that, they've got a real problem.
Well, if you look at our, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but if you look at the increase in staffing, it's still largely special education.
Yeah, I understand.
That's the same challenge.
Right.
But, yeah, I understand.
And we're in negotiations with our second largest group, and we will be with the largest. And so I think the landscape has changed, and I think that's a given around the state. And I think you're going to see a very different picture emerging based on where the state is and what arbitration panels are going to be doing. I think it'll be a very different picture.
Or in addition to the special ed that we're all experiencing increases, there is a dichotomy going on in Darien. It's different in Wilton, that their educational population is growing, where ours is shrinking. So they're getting more students every year, so it might be a little easier to justify an increase there.
And understanding that has a reflection resultant of the tax rates there versus the tax rates here.
Right.
So we're experiencing a growth in Westport as a result of their lower tax rates as well. People are opting out of Wilton because of that. So that's part of the burden that we bear. We look at the tax rate and say, are we attractive from that? Not just are our schools good, are our taxes attractive compared to our contemporaries? And when we see growth in towns that are in our DRG and we are relatively flat, there's a problem with our tax rate.
It's interesting that point. Westport is budgeting, as you see on that sheet, an extra $800,000 in conveyance and permit income for next year because of the real estate boom that's happening in Westport. Well, certainly you could not say we have a real estate boom at all. You know, in Wilton our numbers are down, but we're hearing over and over again from realtors that suddenly Westport, because their taxes are so much lower and their prices have come down, they're a big competitor now to Wilton. And they offer a lot more than Wilton does. And we're seeing a lot of houses not selling in Wilton because the people chose to go to Westport. And that's, you know, we're hearing that all the time from people who, you know, who can't sell their house, or who neighbors can't sell their house. And we're hearing it from realtors. So, you know, it is a reality. And it's something we're going to have to deal with. I mean, it's affecting everyone.
The uptick in permitting
we're sitting here flat.
Our remodels because people aren't selling. So we look at those elements and say, what can Wilton afford? It's not just what can the taxpayer afford, what can we afford if we are going to maintain a competitive, at least be on a competitive even plane with our neighbors. Because if we reach a point where compared to the Westports of the world that we look like Westchester County, we have a serious problem.
Does anybody else have any other follow-up questions?
Just what I did watch your meeting with the Board of Selectmen, so there were some things that they pushed back on. All of those 2013, none of them are coming back into 2012, are they?
We're going to present that to the board. The board will make a decision.
Oh, you haven't met yet?
We
Okay,
haven't-
I'm sorry, I
next
thought you had.
Thursday.
I think they were just given
Okay.
the numbers that weren't discussed, was it?
Hmm?
Thinking out loud.
It was not a receptive
Yeah.
evening.
There weren't balloons?
I wouldn't use that. I thought you had met since then, I'm sorry.
Anything else?
There was just one point in the salaries list. I think we had asked if it was possible to bring the benefits cost into that as well, so that it was clear what the positions were on average costing totally.
It wasn't included in your question that we got. I don't know if it was altered, but it wasn't included, that's why we do.
Okay.
So Warren, are we going to submit follow-ups to these answers?
Well, I was going to say that we've only had a day really to review the answers to the questions, and so yes, there may be follow-ups as we've had more time to review it. There may be an additional question or two as well.
Well, only because I think there was some outstanding to-dos.
Yeah, well, there were some to-dos too.
From this, so maybe we could formulate that and provide them in a written format?
Yes,
Okay.
we will.
I'd ask the Board of Ed, do you want to have any further meetings to talk about what's gonna happen with this budget? I mean, if this is like going to the dentist, we don't have to do it. I mean, we try and, we,
I love that.
you know, we try to make this as informative as possible. If you see any more value, great, we'll do it again. But only if you see value.
And is your plan to post these questions on?
Yes, they are on our website.
Oh, they are?
Now. They were put on tonight.
Okay.
All of the charts in here, can I get those Excels?
Which,
Any and all the data presented in some sort of chart format, tabular form, whatever you want to call it. They're derived from Excels. Just, I'm using the PPX as an example, but it's not the only one. I mean, clearly, Excel's informed this. So to the extent that we can get that electronically, that would be terrific.
Anyway, to Andy's point, if you do decide you want to meet some more, we'd be happy to. Any further comment that you'd like to make? Okay. Anybody else? Then it's time for public participation. Do we have anybody who'd like to participate? Alex?
Yeah, just one comment in support of Andy's point. The other towns are trying to keep it lower now. Over the last 10 years, Wilton has had the highest growth rate in cost per pupil of any town around here, 81.9%. The next nearest one is 15% lower than that. The cost of living adjustment over the last 10 years has been 31%. So it isn't that the town, the Board of Education, in my opinion, has gotten shortchanged. I'm just questioning, what have we gotten that made us, we had to spend so much more to get this? And now the other towns are trying to maintain their costs, but yet I don't see the same thing here in Wilton. And the point that you're making about people leaving, I honestly believe that also. Because the other towns have things like golf courses, they have, that's me, I'm a golfer. So they have other things that they can go to, they have beaches, take your choice. But yet, we have to compete with them, and if the taxes keep going up, we're not going to be able to compete with them.
I saw another hand back there. Is it still up?
Kimber Felton. I want to say I support the school budget for a bunch of different reasons, but the most important one was what happened today. I have a child who had an operation, and her legs are all getting back together, and the high school gym teacher called me. And he said to me, I've done research on your child and the operation that was done to her, and I want to know what can I do to help further her so she can succeed at what she's doing. And this is where our money goes towards. Our money goes towards quality teachers who want to make our children succeed in kindergarten all the way through. And for a teacher to take his time after school hours to call me to double check to make sure that my kid is getting what she needs, I don't think you find that in Westport. I don't know if you find it in Darien, but I know you find it in Wilton. And when people hear stories like that, and that's the stories that parents will tell their friends when they're moving in to this community, that's what draws people. And the reason why people go to Westport, I think, is it's right off of the expressway. But the reason why you come here is because you want to be here where there's some rolling hills and you've got a good school system. We're not coming here for the downtown or the border bookstore. We're coming here for the rolling hills, space, and a really good school system. And I support it.
Thank you. Yes?
Maria Wilcox. I'm a numbers person, so I would love to see a budget for the next couple years. But we all discussed today, Al just said the biggest portion of your budget is salaries. And the contract's not negotiated yet. So I'm a little baffled, because I love numbers, I love to analyze them and look at them. So I'd love to go through numbers, but how do we expect the Board of Ed to give us salary numbers when there's no contract?
You make assumptions. You assume it's going to be, or make a range of assumptions. What if it's this? What if it's that?
Well, we even said Ken, if I remember right.
Right.
You didn't have to do
We
any
exempted them
projection
from
on
that part
salary.
of
We
it.
exempted the projection on salary and said, project everything else.
But
That's
then
all we
aren't you
asked for.
accepting the portion that we're arguing about, aren't you then accepting?
No,
the
because
portion
we
that
can then
Al-
make assumptions based on a range, which is why I answered you with a range. You make an assumption based on a range of, you make a calculation based on a range of assumptions.
Yes, and I guess I would agree with the Board of Ed that turn, you know, you can't make assumptions about special ed, 'cause you don't know how many people, that's a huge part of your budget. You have to make a range about the salaries, because that's a huge part. So I guess well, I would love the numbers, I would love to see projections, but unless, if you had a contract, that's my only point, I don't really want to argue about it, but I would, because I don't know, I don't audit books for public school systems, so I don't know what goes into all the numbers. But it just seems from citizens' point of view that they might have a valid point, that the information they give you isn't valid.
Just to say that, and I appreciate Dick's comment that this is a bad example, but the state does that already, and and there's so much variability in their numbers, understanding that they give us an education cost-sharing grant that includes what their anticipated expectations are, in essence, projections of what those numbers are going to look like, and they have much wider range of variability than we do.
Right, my question would be whether you actually make decisions based on.
The state does.
I don't know, I don't know anything about state accounting or about.
But again,
mean,
I
don't
appreciate
know.
that. I appreciate Dick's.
And the state has to do it 2 years in advance. They have to by law.
Well, I don't know if anyone's looked at how it's helping make decisions or not.
Maria, we're both accounting majors. You got 30% of your costs that you can project. You can't project salaries, but you can project the number of teachers you need based on enrollment. I mean, it's basic accounting. And it doesn't make any difference if it's a nonprofit or
No, I guess
whatever.
teachers are gonna get 5% raises, 4% raises.
You can't do the raises. We know you can't do the raises, but you can project how much staff you need, and you can project all your other costs. And so then it's our job, because we know they can't discuss what the raises are, it's our job then to kind of come up with an estimate that we think that they might be able to save in the contract and fill in that blank. But you at least have a tool to begin to look at it.
And Maria, what it does is this.
It's
It
pretty
gives us
straightforward.
the ability to say,
Well, I know what I will give you, I understand, budgets, you know, I used to do that for a living. I understand budgets, I love budgets, I wish I get budgets, you know, I love my budget at home, I do everything at home this weekend, I love them. But what I'm saying is, it appears to me that a large portion of your budget you don't have, because you don't know what the teacher's salary is. You could say how many teachers there are, but they're gonna make $20 or $50, you don't know.
That's right.
So how do you, so if that's your largest part of your budget, how do you expect to budget? That's all I'm saying.
And I think I answered that. We're gonna have
You don't have-
to, and you did, we're gonna have to come up with a range of what we think is what they're gonna be able to pull out of a contract and drop it into those numbers. But we don't have the other 70%, and we don't have the staffing numbers, and that's what we need from them.
Right, I didn't know if you could legally do that if you didn't have the contract. Yeah, I didn't know what the legal
We're gonna make
contract.
assumptions, well, that's why they can't do
They
it.
can't,
We're
we
gonna do it.
can. We're the Board of Finance, we can do it.
Warren, can I?
Oh, so you.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
We're not part of the negotiations, they can't put numbers down, but we can sit and do it.
Oh, so you were gonna. Well, I'm glad I asked the question then.
Yeah.
Because I thought you wanted them to come up with a
No.
salary
No.
dollar amount for you.
No.
No, no.
That's originally.
You just need the number.
That
was our
takeaway 2 weeks ago when we met. Ken,
No, I
asked a
told
question.
Ken to leave them
Assume the
flat.
current
Take them
That's
contract.
right, we did say
Leave
leave
them
it.
flat. I said, you even said it in your answer.
We took your comments last time to mean use the same percentage increase going forward.
No,
leave it- leave it
That
flat.
was our takeaway, which is why it didn't make any sense to us, because we believe that would be hopefully grossly overinflated.
For Maria and for anybody else, the purpose of the exercise is for us to look at all the factors that Gary was talking about earlier. You have some decline in enrollment. You have increases in state aid. Again, we don't know it's going to happen. We can guess it's going to happen. It allows us to look out 2 years, 3 years, and say, you know what? This year is a bad year, but 2 years from now, given the salary factor that we put in because they wouldn't do it, it looks like a much better year. So maybe we can move tax revenue heavier this
I
year, lighter
understand
out.
modeling. I understand modeling. I understand budgeting. I get it. I'm glad I asked the question.
Now you got it.
You're all-
Warren, I want to say one thing to
Yes.
Alex's point. And Alex, I just because sometimes I don't necessarily want to be agreed with, I want to be clear. I want to be clear about this. I have no problem with Wilton's spending on education outstripping other towns. I really don't. And I think one of the things we can be proudest of is the fact that teachers have gone from being woefully underpaid in my lifetime as a parent to marginally underpaid. Marginally underpaid, yeah. So, all things being equal and plenty of money being available, I don't really care that we're at the top of the reference group in terms of how much we spend per pupil. We've never been at the top of the reference group, and I wouldn't mind us catching up a bunch of slots. So I'm not advocating that for pure form's sake, we not spend as much as local towns on education. That is not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is we don't have the money, so we can't pretend that we do. There's a difference. I just want to be fairly clear about that.
Can I just make one point? Sure. The only point I would make is, I agree with you, but I'd like to see what we're getting for it. In other words, can you show me some quantifiable measurements of how we're doing better than these other towns? And if we're doing better than these other towns, you're absolutely right. We're right to spend more. But if you can't show me some measurements as to that we're doing better than these towns, or give me some goals and then measure them against these goals. That's my point.
I think that was Gail's earlier.
I think that was the point. I'm sorry. That Gail made.
Okay, thank you.
Alex, it's on the website.
I saw Ed's hand first. Ed?
But I'm saying, I'm looking for quantifiable. I look at the state scores on different things. I look at teacher salaries. I look at other things. All of this is available from the state. And I want to see how our students are doing better in measurable quantities. Maybe I'm asking something that nobody else wants.
A lot of that data is
It's in this book. It's on the website. The testing reports. You can see the quantitative data by.
I have looked at, for instance, the SAT scores, and they're dropping. I've looked at the AT scores in 2010. Wilton is lower than Darien and Richfield on the people that scored 3, 4, and 5 in the SAT scores. This is from the state. Now, maybe there's other data.
Are you looking at, sorry, just keep coming back to, have you looked at the testing report? It's on the website. This is for Wilton. It shows